Welcome to Inside Auto Podcast, where we feature everyone and anyone you'd want to talk to in and out of the automotive industry.
Ilana Shabtai here, host of Inside Auto Podcast, where we interview top dealers, GMs, marketers, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders in and out of the automotive industry. And before we introduce today's guest, this episode is sponsored by AutoLeadStar.com. AutoLeadStar is automotive's first and leading customer data and experience platform, CDXP. Top dealers invest in CDXPs to unify dealership data sources, automatically create one-to-one customized journeys, and execute omni-channel shopping experiences. All right, today we have two very special guests with us. We don't always have two people on the podcast at once, so today I am super excited to be speaking to two people who I've actually met in person as well, so excited to get to know them in their new capacity, which we'll talk about. So welcome, Colby Joyner and Jarrod Kilway. Welcome to the podcast. Good morning.
Hello, hello.
Good morning. Good morning.
How are you guys doing?
Amazing now that I showed up.
Yes, we were waiting on you, but it's okay. It's totally worth it. Colby is husband, father, and former air traffic controller in the U.S. Air Force, former EMT, and for the last 8 years, a car guy, and currently the VP of sales at Konect.ai. Prior to Konect.ai, he was the platform director of Bravo Auto Group, and his goal is to bring efficient processes into automotive and increase automotive's use of technology. That is something that we talk a lot about at this podcast. I am obviously a huge proponent of that, so we'll get into that. Jarrod is Automotive News 40 Under 40 nominee, Auto Genius founding member, former director of digital strategy and solutions for Germain Auto, and now VP of strategy and success at Konect.ai. So we have two people from Konect.ai today. We are going to talk a lot about what you guys are doing, what you're solving in automotive. But before we get into that, both of you have been in the automotive industry for quite some time. So I'd love to hear how you got into automotive, but also recently switched from retail to tech. So definitely want to hear about that. We could start with you, Colby. Tell us a little bit about how you got into automotive and what this recent switch has been like for you.
So thank you again for letting us be on. Honestly excited about this. I love just chatting about automotive and marketing and everything in general. But automotive kind of came randomly to me. I'd sold cars very, very briefly when I was like 18, 19 years old. Realized that I was nowhere near mature enough or knowledgeable enough to do it. And so I really was bad at selling cars. So as soon as I realized I was bad at selling cars, went and joined the military, obviously, like you had stated, and did the military thing for a while, couple odd end jobs, after the military, decided, I'm a husband. I had 2 kids at the time. I needed to make more money and decided, hey, I'm going to go back into automotive. My parents had always said like, hey, you should go be a lawyer. You should go do something where because you have that gift of gab, you can sit there and just talk to anybody. Unfortunately, I didn't go to college and I didn't finish that. So in order to be a lawyer, that would have been taken way too long, but I knew that I could just go back in and try to sell cars. And so went in, started selling cars and kind of went down that path and was fortunate enough to be around some really, really good dealers and really good people that placed me in good positions where my talents, I guess, shined. So far, I absolutely I'm so blessed to be able to be in this industry. I feel like it's a perfect match. So going in, do you want me to go into the vendor side now, or do you want me to have Jarrod kind of say his background?
Yeah, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about what it's been like just from the retail side to the vendor side, technology side, and then Jarrod will give us some of his background.
Yeah, so this is my second round on the vendor side.
Okay.
I did do a short stint at another company, and when I went into vendor and left vendor the last time, I never had any intention on going back into retail because retail is just hard, right? And I'm not saying hard as in like I just don't want to do it because it's too hard. It's just it takes so much of your time, and it's so the mentality when you're in the retail store is like you got to work bell to bell, and you're working these 12, 14-hour shifts, and you're so highly focused on all these things, and a lot of it's good. You can learn a lot in a very short amount of time, because you're working, sometimes, double the hours that a normal person works. And, but I never had intention to going back to retail, but I went back into retail, had a great opportunity with the previous group I was with, and stayed there for a while. The mindset that I had was, hey, I need to spend more time at home. I need to have more freedom to kind of explore and create and see how I can make an impact in a lot larger scale. Whenever you change something inside a retail store, or even if it's a group per se, you're still only really impacting the people inside the group or inside the store. And so on the vendor side, my whole mentality is I can make a significantly larger impact, hopefully in the industry for the positive. I don't ever want to be a negative aspect to the industry or bring it down. I want to move it forward and make it more progressive in that way. I know that there's a lot of times I've talked about technology within automotive is kind of behind what other industries have. And so my goal is to try to see, how do we move the technology forward as fast as we can, as efficient as we can, but where everybody is staying on board. I don't want to go so far in the future, so far forward that we start to have people dropping off saying, man, I can't even understand this. I don't get it. And it doesn't make sense. So moving as quickly as we can while still having everybody bought in and everybody moving forward and seeing the positive changes. It's just exciting to me. I mean, there's been very few jobs in my life that I've woken up every morning and just super excited to go in there and see what kind of impact I can make. So that's my retail to vendor side. Like, that's what excites me, is being able to impact the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's super powerful, and that resonates with me, obviously. Jarrod, what about you?
So I got into automotive back in, early 2004, 2005. While I was in college, actually, a friend of mine in college, lived in the same dorm. Roommate, his dad owned an auto dealer group up in, Ohio. So, thinking of the period of time we were in at that point in time, which attracted to me was, how behind auto was. So if you date yourself and look back at what were you doing in 2004, 2005, what was the technology like? What was the temperature and thermostat of the industry at that point looking at digital? We're talking about the first time they needed websites. They needed somebody to come take photos of their cars and write descriptions and stuff. Like, this was so new to them, and there was such a limited tech presence in the automotive space. So immediately, coming from a family of background of tech, I've always was attracted to automotive. And then this paradigm shift happened from automotive to really grow and go into a digital world. So worked through them, and then 2006 moved to Florida. Was in multiple roles at multiple dealer groups. Great opportunity and great success. From there, I actually left and did a similar to Colby stint at vendor side before, with a cutting edge CRM at the time. Dating myself, this is 2010, where CRMs were like the whole rave in the industry, and that's where all the digital dealer parties, everybody's a CRM that's throwing big parties at NADA and digital dealer. So it was the place to be. So learned a lot through that experience, and eventually migrated over to the OEM side with Lexus as a field consultant for Lexus, and really working with dealers on digital. And it really shocks me now, coming back after 6.5, 7 years back in dealer. I worked really hard with Brian Kramer to build a presence, build a brand, and build a process and scenario. Now, really migrating back to the vendor side, my goal is to bring the knowledge I've learned from the years in dealer, in vendor, with OEMs and all dealers around the country, bringing that knowledge back to help solve for solutions that some dealers may not even realize that's a problem right now. They don't have that internal thermostat set to be able to identify what are the issues. Because if you ask 90% of the dealers in the space today what their biggest issue is, they're just going to tell you inventory. And I'm going to say, well, what's your process look like? What's your trade process? What's all these different structured processes of your store? If they're not clearly defined and ironed out, this is the opportunity to make those adjustments while we're under this rise of profitability as an industry, to really make sure that we're set up for that next wave of the unknown and remain successful.
And actually that brings me to another question, which is, can you give us an example of how you helped react to like a big market crisis, whether that is COVID or inventory shortage while you were at, Germain or some other group in your experience? Just because I think a lot of times it's easy to react in a very impulsive way and not in a high level strategic way. And it sounds like you were able to bring those processes to the auto dealers that you were working with.
Yeah, with Germain through COVID, I think everybody through COVID, it was the mass adoption of digital retail. A lot of people thought that was going to solve all their problems and it was automatically going to work fluently. And, next thing you know, every dealer is like Carvana, which we all know and realize today, that's not reality. But we were able to, during COVID, do myself in Florida and stores in Ohio, not traveling, we were able to launch these digital retail tools, get mass adoption from the team, as well as have great success, not only internally, but also with our customers, because we had this dedicated structured process of what it's going to look like, how it needs to behave, how it needs to engage and interact with the consumer. And it was so clearly defined. It was almost overly simple for our internal team, but even more simpler for the consumer. I always use the train of thought, and Colby's starting to pick up on it now that we're working together. If it's too complicated for my 9-year-old to understand it, it is too complicated for the consumer who buys a car every 4 to 5 years. And the salespeople and the team inside of the store, it's too complicated. It has to be Crayola crayon simple, because when you have simplicity, it makes it easier and everybody wants to be a part of it, but everybody has clear visibility to what their expectations are.
Yeah, that's great. And then Colby, I'm sure you're in line with that. What were some of the biggest gaps that you saw on the marketing side at the dealerships that you've been at, that you were either able to solve, in your position there, or something that you're super passionate about helping solve now that you're on the tech side?
So I would say the biggest gaps, like going through COVID and looking at some of this stuff and how are we adjusting marketing and how are we, trying to attract the customers into our store. We went from being not very granular with the data and just kind of being more of a shotgun approach. Like, hey, we're going to just shotgun out because we had the inventory, we had the branding, everybody knew where to go. You knew to come to us, to where we had to really start being granular with our approaches and saying, okay, we got to start targeting specific people. We got to start targeting, lease returns. We got to start targeting, the 3 to 5 year, previous purchase customers. And then really starting to look at the attribution of everything. Where are people coming into our website? Where are they, doing or executing on social? And, what's our display ads looking like? Changing our whole mindset on how are we actually marketing versus doing just the overall, hey, we're just going to put money everywhere. And we know that it works because the pay line at the end is good. So, making that adjustment over and being very targeted about it was our transition over at the other group. But that kind of goes in line with, I can get very granular like that.
Yeah.
And so, that's the one thing that helps on my side coming into this is I can have that very strong 30,000 foot view overall premise of, hey, this is what we do, in a very simplistic way, breaking it down to like one sentence. But at the same time, the reason that I have the one sentence that makes so much sense is I dove down into the specifics, right? And I said, okay, here's the problems that are being, that the dealerships at the end user are facing, and how do we resolve those very specific problems, but make it easy enough for everybody to understand in a one sentence phrase. And so being able to kind of go back and forth.
9-year-olds can understand.
Exactly. I write a lot better in crayon than I do pen. So
I love that. I think what you said is really important in that. Well, two things that you've said so far. One of them is that automotive is always going to be trailing, 5 to 10 years behind e-commerce and others. I think as an industry, because we're aware of that, we're working on that. But that's one thing. And then the second thing is that, yes, we need to be more targeted. So only now, again, even though this tech has been available outside of automotive, only now is automotive really focusing on, okay, how do I actually cut audiences from my CRM and send proper messages based on that and do it automatically so that I don't have to have a team manually sitting there, exporting lists from my CRM and importing them into whatever, email platform they're using for that month and then ditch it and then use something else. And then the data doesn't follow through. So I think that's really important because that is going to be, if it hasn't been, it's going to be a huge focus for the rest of 2022 and 2023 for dealers.
Well, think about it this way. Like, I think there's a reason why dealerships are kind of scared of automation, is because automation has been very broad, right? It's been incredibly broad. Like, oh yeah, we can automate this, but then it's just the message is simple. It doesn't hit the person, in their soul.
Right.
Like,
They think it's taking away that touch of, the dealership that everyone's known for 50 years.
Yeah. So if you can automate specific, right? If you can target specific with automation and make that whole process and workflow easier to where it relieves the dealership from some task and work and other items, and it allows them to be more proficient and efficient and effective and profitable on their side so that they can focus on the things that matter. I said it in a conversation I had, I don't even know, a couple weeks ago, but processes can be automated, but people can't. Like, I can't automate Jarrod. I can't say, hey, Jarrod, here's your automation. I'm going to plug it in. Here's your code. And there you go. And you're going to run that way. So, the more that we can automate a process that makes sense and it's specific to the customer and there's a inherent feeling behind the process, but it's automated, and leave the emotion and the relationship building and the humanity to the dealers and to the salespeople, and kind of had that separated. And so that the process is automated, but the retail people are able to functionally build the relationships and have the communication and talk to them. It allows the dealerships to get better in that relationship style selling, and also at the same time get better because a lot of their process is automated. So they're not missing stages. They're not missing things in time in terms of trying to blend it both, where it's like you as a salesperson have to be automated because I need these phone calls done, these emails done, all these tasks done, all these tests done, all this, you got to do your lot walk, you got to do all this other stuff. But at the same time, you have to be very personal and you got to be able to build relationships, better than most. So we just focus on the relationships in terms of people, and then use automation to functionally make the process more simple. And where the dealers are getting the proper information, more information on each customer, so they know how to, engage with that customer. I think that's where we're hopefully headed in automotive, is allowing the dealers.
I think you nailed it, Colby. I got to jump in on this one because, media simplification on this one. I think that really comes down to where the fear is on the dealer side is the unknown. What is this going to do? What's the disruption this is going to cause for my customers and, more importantly, my people, my staff? As you talked about, can't replace people with, automation. However, people are afraid inside the dealer world that any automation is going to purely expose the lack of productivity from individuals inside the store. It's easier for a dealer to try and hold a person accountable to action than it is tech that is already doing the action. So I think the big, component when it all is put together, they're afraid of what is going to be exposed when we do this, because managers and GSMs and GMs be like, we've added an automation and now look at our growth and success. And wow, we could have done this the whole time if we would have had process procedures internally to execute the same way. I didn't lead my team the right way, so now I'm going to be exposed. So I don't want automation. I'm just going to keep doing what I've always done.
Yeah, I think they need to change. I think having the mindset of, once you start building the automation, you have to change the benchmarks of what the dealer sees as a successful rep, right? Yeah. The successful rep doesn't mean that you make 25 phone calls a day, you send 25 emails, and you send 25 videos, and you send 25 text messages, and you've done your 2 OEM tests. That doesn't mean that you're successful, right? But there's so much of a mentality in a store that says, you have to accomplish all these metrics and all these data points. You got to accomplish these tasks. And that's what makes you successful. I think as soon as a dealer is able to adjust their mindset and say, yes, that's important for them to do their follow-up and make sure that they're engaging with the customers that the dealership brought in. But what's successful, a successful salesperson or BDC rep is the ability to build the strong relationships with the customer and the community. Somebody that has a good social presence and is able to have, videos of their customers, and they can put that publicity out there. That's what would make a good rep. And so adjusting the standards of what a dealer sees as a successful rep will help automation be able to get inserted into the dealership and be successful inside the dealership.
Right. And I think it's like you both are saying, it's a mentality switch. You have automation to help with scaling a certain process so that you can take the person out of that manual, monotonous, here you have to click dial 25 times and actually build the relationships, which is going to be a really important thing when selling to, Gen Z and Gen X. What are we at? We're Gen Z. Gen Z. Selling to millennial. We don't even talk about millennial anymore. Selling to Gen Z, because I think that's what, obviously that's what they were born into and that's what they're looking for. So the adoption is there. I think the mentality to really understand the impact, there's still like a little bit more work to be done on the dealer side to adopt that.
I think it's so, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to hog anything, but I think it's so, I think it's so,
we want to know, we want to hear expertise.
I think it's so important. So like, if you look at Carvana, and I'm not attacking Carvana per se, right? But you look at, that was such a large overcorrection to where somebody saw that there was an issue, right? And so they thought, okay, in order to fix the issue, we got to overcorrect. We got to go so far over with technology and process and how you buy a car. Let's change the way you buy a car. Most people have a general idea of how to buy a car. And I think that if you take baby steps in terms of changing that technology, in terms of changing a process or adjusting the process, if you take baby steps, and you get a far more increased level of adoption of that. Mm-hmm. And so I think in reality, as we go forward, we need to make these small baby steps instead of coming in there. I think that was a problem with digital retail, is obviously COVID hit, and obviously we had an issue with, dealerships wanted to stay open. So they needed to figure out how to sell a car. So they said, okay, we need to do this digital retail thing that's coming out. And so we're all going to go in there. Well, there was no standardization of digital retail. Every digital retail company had a different process, a different way of doing things, different APIs, different connections and integrations.
Right.
But if we can, and it's because everybody just went mass market, just boom. Like there was so many companies that are coming out there saying, hey, well, we have a DR tool. But if we look at automation, and if we look at the way that processes should be kind of adjusted moving forward, if we kind of create a standard on it, like for us, we're not sitting here, for Konect, we're not trying to take over the entire sales process. We're not trying to take over the entire communication process. We're taking over and we're helping out a specific portion, right? Because at some point we need to hand it back to the store because they're the experts of doing it. We're not trying to sit here and say that we're the experts. We're not going to step on their toes. We're not going to jump in and answer questions that we don't have 100%, confirmation that it's correct. So it's a baby step moving forward with the way that the technology sits right now, that we know that we can handle this portion. And we know that's an easy way to have it get adopted. And before we move into other portions to help with automation, we have to make sure that we're really strong in this one prior to moving forward. Instead of just saying, hey, now we're this automation company and we can take over your entire sales process. There's going to be some dealers that would say, yeah, I want that. But then it's going to be a constant failure because there's going to be frustrations and people are going to get confused on how this process works. So I think moving forward, like baby steps will allow us to start really moving. It's one of those things, like you can't take a train that's stopped and just all of a sudden get it going. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy to get that thing moving forward, and it creeps forward first before it starts rolling fast. So we have to slowly push it forward, because eventually it's like that exponential growth in like look at technology. It doubles, the capability of technology doubles like every 2 years, every 5 years, or even more. So it's the same thing with automation, the same thing with changing processes inside automotive and the way to buy a car. You got to slowly move there, because eventually it's that exponential growth. You'll start making bigger and bigger and bigger changes as we move on, as the adoption happens.
Yeah. And you touched a bit on the challenges that Konect is trying to solve in the industry. Jarrod, you've been there for a month now, maybe a little bit more.
Just a little bit under here.
Oh, just a little bit under.
Yeah.
Okay, well, congrats on the new role. Do you, I'd love to hear from your point of view what you are solving on, for dealers, where you see in terms of like the strategy, where you guys are going in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months. And, I always like to talk about the different ways different technologies are solving for these big challenges that Colby and you brought up on this episode. So tell us a little bit about that and what you've been seeing and why you're so passionate about contributing to that mission.
Yeah, no, I'm extremely excited. We look at now anywhere you go. I'm not sure if it is where you are. I know here in most of the U.S., employment right now and trying to find people to do a job is extremely difficult.
Yes.
They're help wanted everywhere. Starbucks, they're shutting down early. They can't find staff. So we talk about fix the hole in the roof while the sun is shining mentality. I'm excited for the ability, what Colby was talking about with Konect, to control a portion of the conversation, to be able to fill the holes we have as an industry when it comes down to finding staff. You look at how hard it is to find a BDC rep right now, or an internet team, or an internet manager. I'm excited for Konect to do that. Now, that's on the sales side. And I would say sales is 5 to 10 years ahead of service. And then trying to talk about sales to service process, probably another 5 years behind that from a process and tech standpoint. Then if you really want to roll back the clocks to look at like 30, 40 years behind where we're at on the sales side, go look at your HR and recruiting. Look at your HR recruiting at your normal dealership around town. How many applications even get engaged? You have applications sitting there. They've never been called, never been emailed. There's been no correspondence from anybody at the store. So I think of this now, Konect is going to be able to help us solve for putting the customer in touch with somebody at the store at the right time with the right information, so that we can have that handoff as streamlined as possible. I look to digital retail as connecting the dots between online and in-store. I'm looking to build this with Konect to bridge the gap between customer just putting information in and actually engaging. I want to bridge that gap with Konect to make it easier and simpler for the store to execute and take better care of the customers. So, doing some studies, I look at, KBB ICO as an example, and AccuTrade, same thing. The average ICO store gets about 1,000 leads a month. You look at that bandwidth that takes to continuously engage with that. That's big headcount. That's big overhead expense. But the quality of engagement is not as what most people would expect. Multiple calls, emails, text messages to get them engaged. Why not take the 300 to 400 people who actually respond to engage, put those in front of your team because you know that they are lower funnel, let the other ones run through our AI, make it our responsibility to try and get them to engage and pass those on to the dealers. So your team is working more. Your team in essence is working smarter rather than working harder. At the end of the day, we're being more efficient.
And that goes back to what Colby was talking about, which is instead of having everyone one-off answer every single thing, this helps just scale, prioritize, make your staff more efficient. And I think when automation was first introduced to automotive dealers, or at least from I've been only on the vendor side, so I feel like there's been a shift. At first, they were really scared about automation replacing jobs. Okay, now we understand that it makes staff more efficient, and now the fear is that it's not going to be personalized, which we also hit on. Which that the whole point of it is how can you personalize and hyper target at scale. So we're trying to help.
I'm going to jump in. You talk personalization. If you look at personalization of current communication from a dealer and go audit 10, 20 dealerships' responses. If I submitted a lead off their website, a lead off of AutoTrader, my trade information off KBB ICO, and a lead from Cars, guess what? The first response, no matter where I come from, it's all the same.
It's all the
So
same.
tell me where the personalization really exists, because it doesn't right now.
It's a perception of personalization.
A perception of personalization. I love that. That is on point. Yeah. Well, I think automation and just in general technology can solve for both of those things, because it's really not happening anyway, as you said.
Well, and one of the things with automation or any change in technology, if you look outside of automotive, there's so much integration. Like you can take 10 different softwares, 10 different companies that do different items, and really you could have one hub and just you log into one hub and you see everything. Automotive is like, no, you have to have 35 browser windows open and 4 different softwares downloaded, hard coded to your PC to be able to functionally run. You have to have 2 screens now. Like you can't just have one, you have to have 2. And so like with us, and we do this primarily because we want to make this shift as an industry, not because it's an advantage for us in general, but there's really no reason for a dealer to have a browser window open for us. Like we notify and we push into a CRM and we do all the stuff that is necessary for the dealer to understand what's going on with the customer, but they don't have to log into Konect's portal. They don't have to have a browser window open. They don't have to go and inspect what we're doing. We make it non-disruptive, right? Continue doing your sales process the way that you want to do it and the way that you are going to do it. Because I've, obviously coming from retail, one of the frustrations that I always had was somebody on the outside, a vendor, whether they had automotive or non-automotive experience, trying to tell me that I needed to change the process inside of our store because they're the expert. Now they may be an expert and that's great. And I'll take their advice and I'm always listening. I never discount anybody, but it's still our process. You're not in our store. You're not responsible for selling the cars. So we don't want to be a disruptor. We don't want to go in there and say, hey, you need to change your sales process to this. Your team should be doing X, Y, and Z. Like all we're saying is give us the opportunity to help you be more effective with the current customers that you have. So we're going to hop in there in this specific spot. We're going to create lift on the inbounds to give your team more customers to communicate with, but we're not going to be impactful. Like we're not going to bother you. We're not going to disrupt your processes. We're not going to make your team confused. We're not going to, throw a wrench into the wheel. Like we're not doing that. Yeah. And so that's one of that baby steps of allowing dealers to understand that every time you add a software piece or some kind of process piece with new technology, it doesn't mean that it has to be disruptive. Actually, as we move forward, it should be far less disruptive going forward. Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys read any of the dealer marketing articles out there, but I sit on the expert panel there, and I literally just wrote a piece. They're doing now technology disruption in the industry is their theme. And I don't remember exact title, but it was like the biggest disruption of all, quiet. And so I very much agree with that. It's all about how the quietest dealerships are probably the ones that are being the most disruptive. So that wasn't a shameless plug here. I just wanted to say that I did totally on point, and I just wrote something about that. So I really do believe that. And Jarrod, here, if you want to end us off here, I know you're itching to say something, so we'll hear you.
No,
we'll close out here.
It's great. We were just talking, what Colby was talking about, the automation components of really connecting the dots. And I look with what you guys are doing as well. And the alignment between us at Konect.ai and what you guys are doing Auto Lead Start, it's crazy how much it aligns, because we're trying to achieve the same goal of simplifying the process and we're trying to make the dealership's team more effective. You're trying to be more effective with their marketing dollars and their marketing spend at Auto Lead Start through automation.
Yep.
And really being able to capitalize and grow their opportunity. Whereas a lot of times, it's just the money is for marketing. And you guys are really taking it to a whole new level, removing a lot of the overhead cost where it's, 5, 10, 20 people pulling data list and dropping codes here into an email. So it's funny how this all came together today, kind of connected per se. Another shameless plug there. But how it all connects, and we're trying to really battle for that same goal of streamlining the process through tech to make it easier for our clients and a better overall experience for the consumers, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Yeah, 1000%. And I think the technologies that are going to make it and the partnerships that are going to work is when the technology has the dealer's best interest, at heart. So we have that in common for sure. Thank you guys so much today for joining Inside Auto Podcast. You can find us insideautopodcast.com. Of course, you can find us on all mainstream outlets. Wherever you listen to your podcast, we will be there. So tune in if you like this episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Inside Auto Podcast. Check out our other episodes with top entrepreneurs and industry leaders.